I am 73 years old now, and my hands shake when I hold a cup of tea. The tremor started about 5 years ago after my husband passed. The doctors say it's just age, just nerves, just life catching up with me. But I know better. These hands shake because they remember. They remember carrying platters I was never meant to eat from. They remember scrubbing pots while others laughed in the next room. They remember the weight of that roast. The one I took on a Tuesday evening in March 2 years ago. The roast that changed everything. My name is Eleanor, though for most of my life I answered to other things. Mother. From children who learned to expect everything and appreciate nothing. Dear. From a husband who said it the way you'd say, furniture, or wallpaper. Something present, functional, unnoticed until it's gone. And from my mother-in-law, I was simply she, or her, as if naming me directly would grant me too much humanity. I married young, 22, which wasn't particular for 1973. But young enough that I hadn't yet learned that love and partnership was supposed to be the same thing. Richard was handsome in that solid, unremarkable way that promises reliability. Brown hair always combed to the left, shirts tucked in even on Sundays, a laugh that came easily but never lasted long. He worked at the textile factory, and he was kind to me in the beginning. The way you're kind to something new and pleasant, before familiarity breeds not contempt exactly but indifference. We lived with his mother. Not temporarily, not until we saved enough for our own place, but permanently, because that was the arrangement. The house on Maple Street with the green shutters, and the garden that bloomed faithfully every spring belonged to Martha Whitmore, and Martha Whitmore belonged to no one. She was 60 when I moved in, a widow of 15 years who had perfected the art of ruling her domain through silence and perfectly timed sighs. She never yelled. She never had to. A look could wither you. A pause before answering could make you question everything you'd just said. You'll make the coffee in the morning, she told me on my first day as a wife. Not asked. Told. Richard likes it strong but not bitter. 2 sugars, cream to the color of sand. You'll learn. And I learned. How I learned. I learned that the laundry had to be hung precisely, shirts facing the same direction, towels folded with the edges aligned just so. I learned that dinner was at 6 o'clock, never 6:05, never 5:55. I learned that my opinions on the evening news were unwelcome, that my laughter was too loud, that the way I hummed while cooking was distracting. I learned to make myself smaller and smaller, until I was barely there at all. Richard never defended me. I want to be clear about that, because for years I made excuses for him. He was caught in the middle, I told myself. He loved his mother, and wasn't that admirable? But the truth that took me decades to swallow, was that he simply didn't think about it. My discomfort existed in a place he never looked. His mother's little comments. Her way of redoing everything I did just slightly differently to show it wasn't quite right. None of it registered as cruelty to him, because I never cried where he could see. I was cheerful at breakfast, pleasant at dinner, warm in our bed. What was there to defend me from? The children came. First Daniel, then 3 years later Caroline. I loved them with a ferocity that surprised me, a physical ache of love that made my chest tight. Finally, I thought, finally there would be people in this house who were mine. Who would love me not for what I did but for who I was. And they did, when they were small. Daniel would wrap his chubby arms around my neck and tell me I smelled like cookies. Caroline would cry for me and only me when she fell, when she was frightened, when the world was too big and strange. But Martha got to them early. She had time. I was always cleaning, always cooking, always managing the invisible labor that keeps a house from collapsing into chaos. She would sit with them in the afternoon light, the good grandmother, patient and indulgent, and she would teach them things. How to tie shoes, how to count coins, and quietly, so quietly I didn't notice until it was done, how to see me the way she did. Your mother's a bit scattered today, isn't she? I heard her say once to 6-year-old Daniel. He'd been waiting for me to play with him, but I was elbow deep in dishes from the lunch she'd invited her church friends to without telling me in advance. Daniel's sweet boy looked confused. Mama's washing dishes, he said simply. Yes, Martha replied, and her voice was honey over glass. She does spend a lot of time in the kitchen. Some people are just more suited to that sort of thing. By the time they were teenagers, my children had learned to expect me to serve them, learned to leave their dishes on the table, their wet towels on the floor, their problems in my lap and their gratitude nowhere at all. I told myself it was normal, that all mothers felt unappreciated, that this was just the bargain you made when you chose to love people this much. The roast. I should tell you about the roast. It was March 14th, 1983. I remember because it was 2 days after Caroline's 9th birthday, and we'd had the party that weekend. 20 children screaming through the house, and I'd made 3 cakes because Martha insisted one wasn't enough. And then I'd cleaned melted ice cream out of the carpet until midnight while everyone else slept. I was tired, the kind of tired that lives in your bones, that makes your teeth ache. That Tuesday, I'd planned something simple for dinner. Pasta maybe, with the sauce I could make in my sleep. But when I mentioned it at breakfast, Martha made that sound, not quite disapproval, but close enough, and said that Richard's boss might stop by that evening, and wouldn't it be nice to have something more impressive, just in case. So I made a roast. A beautiful standing rib roast that cost more than I wanted to spend, seasoned with rosemary from the garden and garlic I'd minced so fine it was almost paste. I made roasted potatoes with thyme, green beans with slivered almonds, a salad with the good vinegar. The kitchen was hot, and my feet hurt, and the whole house smelled like a magazine photograph of someone else's life. Richard's boss never came, but the family gathered at 6 o'clock sharp. Richard, Martha, Daniel, who was 13 and growing out of his jeans every month, Caroline with her hair in braids I'd done that morning before she left for school. The roast sat on the platter, perfect and steaming, and for just a moment I felt proud. Look what I made, I thought. Look what I can do. We sat down. Richard began to carve. He gave his mother the first slice, thick and pink and perfect. Then Daniel, then Caroline, then himself. The platter went around the table, and I waited, because I always took last. That was the order of things. Wife serves, wife waits, wife takes what's left. But when the platter came to me, there were only 2 small end pieces, mostly fat and gristle, and a pile of bones with scraps of meat clinging to them. I stared at it. At this roast I'd spent the afternoon preparing. This roast I'd budgeted for and seasoned and timed perfectly so it would rest just right before serving. And there was nothing left that was worth eating. Is something wrong? Martha asked, and her voice was innocent, but her eyes weren't. She knew. Of course she knew. I opened my mouth. I almost said what I always said. No, this is fine, I'm not very hungry anyway. The words were there, waiting, practiced. But then Caroline spoke. My daughter, my baby girl with the braids I'd woven before dawn, looked at my plate and said, without looking up from her own, Mom always eats after everyone anyway. She doesn't mind. Not a question, a statement. A fact of nature, like rain or gravity. And Richard cut another piece of his roast and said nothing. Daniel reached for more potatoes. Martha smiled. Just barely, just enough, and took a sip of her water. Something inside me broke, or maybe it was the opposite. Maybe something that had been broken for years suddenly snapped back into place, sharp and clear and painful. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor too loudly. Everyone looked at me. Eleanor, Richard said, and he sounded annoyed, as if I were making a scene about nothing. I didn't explain, I didn't announce. I simply reached across the table, picked up the platter with what remained of the roast. The beautiful center cuts they hadn't taken yet, still warm, still perfect. And I held it against my chest. Juice soaked into my blouse. I didn't care. What are you doing? Martha's voice was sharp now, the honey gone. I looked at her. Really looked at her, Reby, for the first time in 10 years. She was smaller than I'd thought. Smaller and older and suddenly, startlingly, powerless. I'm eating, I said quietly. And I walked out of the dining room, through the kitchen, out the back door into the March evening where the air was cool and smelled like rain coming. I sat down on the back steps with the platter in my lap, and I ate that roast with my hands. I tore into it like an animal, like someone starving, and maybe I was. The meat was perfect, tender and seasoned just right, pink in the middle, crispy at the edges. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted because it was mine. I'd made it, and now I was eating it, and no one was going to serve themselves first or tell me I didn't mind or expect me to smile, while they took what should have been mine all along. I could hear them inside. Voices rising, Richard calling my name, the scrape of chairs. I didn't move. I sat there in the near dark with grease on my chin and tears on my face and something like joy singing in my chest. Richard came out eventually. "Eleanor, what the hell is wrong with you? Come inside. You're embarrassing yourself." "No," I said. "Just that. Just no. Mom's upset. The kids don't understand. You need to apologize and, no." He stared at me. In 10 years of marriage I had never refused him anything. "You're being ridiculous. It's just dinner. Why are you acting like this?" And I understood right then that he genuinely didn't know. He'd sat at that table for a decade and watched his mother diminish me in 1,000 small ways, watched his children learn to expect my service without my humanity, and he'd never once thought it was wrong because I'd never said it was wrong. I had been too good at swallowing it down, too practiced at making myself easy to overlook. "Go inside, Richard," I said tiredly. "I'll be in later." But I wasn't. I sat there until the roast was gone and the platter was nothing but bones and cold grease. I sat there until the lights in the kitchen went off and the house fell silent, and then I sat there longer, watching the stars come out, feeling the night air raise goosebumps on my arms, tasting salt and meat, and something that felt dangerously like freedom. I didn't leave that night. I want to be clear about that too, because this isn't a story about dramatic exits and triumphant independence. Real life is slower, harder. I changed. The next morning, I made breakfast for myself first. Eggs and toast and coffee exactly how I liked it, which turned out to be less cream than Richard wanted and no sugar at all. I sat down and ate while they stared. "What about our breakfast?" Daniel asked. "The eggs are on the stove," I said. "The bread's by the toaster. Help yourself." Martha's face went purple, but I didn't wait to hear what she'd say. I took my coffee upstairs and I drank it while reading the newspaper. Something I'd never had time for before, because mornings had been for everyone else. I stopped doing laundry that wasn't mine. I stopped picking up after people who had functioning hands. I cooked dinner, but I served myself first now, always, and I took the portions I wanted. If there wasn't enough left for everyone else, well, perhaps someone else should have helped with the cooking. They didn't know what to do with me. Richard tried anger, then bewilderment, then bargaining. Martha tried guilt, then coldness, then playing the victim. The children, confused and angry at this sudden shift in the natural order, alternated between sullenness and outbursts. "You're being selfish," Caroline screamed at me once, when I refused to drive her to her friend's house because I was tired. "Yes," I agreed calmly, "I suppose I am." It took Richard 3 months to ask me what I wanted. 3 months of tense dinners and cold silences, and him sleeping on the edge of the bed, as far from me as possible without actually leaving it. We were in the kitchen. I was reading, he was drinking beer, and he said, quietly, "I don't understand what happened. What did I do?" And I thought about all the ways I could answer that. All the years of small cuts I could list, the moments I could itemize. But I was tired, and it wouldn't matter anyway. "You can't explain water to a fish." "You didn't do anything," I said finally. That was the problem. He didn't understand. I could see it in his face. But something in him must have recognized that I was serious, that whatever had been easy to ignore before become impossible to overlook now. "What do you want?" he asked. "A place of my own," I said. "An apartment. Something small. I'll still help with the kids, but I need space that's mine." He looked relieved, actually relieved, and I understood that some part of him would be grateful to have the old order restored without my unsettling presence disrupting it. "If that's what you need," he said. It took 4 more months to arrange. 4 months of saving money I'd squirreled away from grocery budgets, of looking at listings, of planning. Martha didn't speak to me for most of that time, which was a blessing. The children were hurt and confused. And that was harder. I tried to explain to them that I loved them, that this wasn't about them, but they'd been raised to believe that my love meant my service, and without one, they couldn't recognize the other. I moved out on a Saturday in October. Richard helped me carry boxes to the truck I'd rented, his final act of husbandly duty, performed with tight-lipped silence. The apartment was small, just 3 rooms, on the 2nd floor of a building downtown. It had a window that faced east, and the morning light came in golden and clean. I slept better that first night than I had in 13 years. We didn't divorce, not then. Richard didn't believe in it, and some part of me still felt obligated to maintain the former of the thing even if the substance was gone. I came by on Sundays, had dinner, helped Caroline with her homework, but I left at 8 o'clock and went home to my own space, where no one expected anything from me that I hadn't explicitly offered. The children came around eventually, not right away. It took years, really. But when Daniel went to college and had to do his own laundry for the first time, when Caroline got her first job and came home exhausted and expected her roommate to have made dinner, they started to understand. Little by little, they saw that the world didn't automatically arrange itself around their needs, and maybe they thought about how it had always seemed to arrange itself at home, and who had been doing that arranging. Daniel apologized when he was 25. He came to my apartment with flowers and he cried, and he said, "I'm sorry I didn't see you." It was enough. More than enough. Caroline took longer. She married a man who expected her to be what I'd been, and she tried for a while because that's what she'd learned a woman does. It took her 3 years to leave him, and when she did, she showed up at my door at 2 in the morning with suitcases and swollen eyes and said, "Teach me how you did it. Teach me how you chose yourself." And I did. Help me, I did. Richard died suddenly when I was 61. Heart attack, quick and clean. They called me because I was still his wife on paper, still his next of kin. I went to the funeral and I cried, not for what we'd had, but for what we'd never managed to build. He'd been a good man by most measures, faithful, hardworking, honest. But he'd never seen me, not really, and you can't love what you don't see. Martha went into a nursing home a year before Richard died. Dementia, the kind that erases you slowly. I visited her, which surprised everyone including myself. I'd sit by her bed and read to her, and she'd look at me with vague confusion, unable to remember who I was, or why she'd once thought it so important to make me small. One day near the end, she was having a clear moment. She looked at me with her sharp eyes back for just a minute and said, "You left?" "Yes," I said. "I never thought you would." She was quiet for a moment. I should have been kinder. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was acknowledgement, and after all those years that felt like something. "Yes," I said again. "You should have." She died a few weeks later. I didn't cry. Now I'm 73, and my hands shake, and I live in that same small apartment with the east-facing window. My children visit often. My grandchildren, 4 of them now, call me on Sundays. They're growing up in homes where their mothers eat first, where their fathers notice when something needs doing, where service and love aren't confused for one another. Sometimes Caroline brings her daughters over for lunch, and I watch them eat without waiting to be served, without expecting anyone to sacrifice themselves for their comfort. I watch Caroline teach them that their needs matter, but so do everyone else's, that love is not the same thing as erasure. "You changed everything," Caroline told me once. "When you took that roast and walked out, you changed what was possible. But here's the thing I need you to understand. I didn't change anything by being brave. I changed it by finally being unable to swallow one more moment of my own disappearance. And the cost of that change was high. I lost years with my children. I lived with loneliness and judgment, and the constant question of whether I'd been selfish, whether I'd failed, whether a good woman would have just learned to be content with the scraps. Even now, even after everything, there are days when I wake up and think maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have stayed. Maybe I gave up too easily on making them understand, on teaching Richard to see me, on showing Martha that I was worth more than my use. But then I make my coffee, no sugar, just a bit of cream, and I sit in my east-facing window with the morning light, and I think about that roast, how it tasted eaten in the dark on the back steps, claimed instead of given, chosen instead of accepted as leftover. And I know with the certainty that lives deeper than doubt, that I did the right thing, not because I won, not because everything worked out perfectly, not because I proved anything to anyone, but because for 41 years now I have eaten first, and that simple act, that quiet, revolutionary act of taking what I need before serving others, has taught me something that all those years of sacrifice never did. It taught me that I exist, that I matter, that my hunger is as real and as worthy as anyone else's, and some truths are worth any cost to learn.